Hey everyone, my name is Zach, and I'm a social work volunteer at Light Movement. This workshop is a part of our series, Hidden Stressors in Education, Burnout, Trauma, and Grief. In this section, we're going to focus on understanding grief. So, what it is, how it shows up, why it matters, especially in educational and helping spaces. We'll talk about different ways that grief can be experienced, how it impacts the whole person, and why it doesn't follow a linear path. The goal is to build a deeper understanding of grief so we can better recognize it in ourselves and in the people that we support. So, with that, let's start by looking at what grief actually is. So, when we talk about grief, we're not just talking about death. Grief is a natural response to loss. And loss can show up in a lot of different ways. It can be the death of someone we love, but it can also be things like losing a relationship or experiencing infertility, changes in health, or even losing a sense of safety or identity. What's important here is recognizing that grief isn't limited to just one type of experience. It shows up anywhere there's loss and meaning attached to that loss. So, because of that, a lot of grief goes unrecognized, especially in these helping professions. People are carrying it quietly while still showing up every day supporting others. So once we start to expand on what grief actually is, the next question becomes, how do we understand the experience of grief? So a lot of us may be familiar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. So this is denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And while these stages can give us some language for some of these heavy emotions that come with loss, grief doesn't actually work in a straight or linear line here. People don't move neatly from one stage to the next. It can also be important to know that this model originally focused on people facing their own mortality. And over time, it's really been expanded and extrapolated into something much broader. So instead of thinking of grief as this checklist, it's more helpful to understand that grief is not linear. It definitely mirrors much more of the experience here on the right. And there's no way to do it. It looks different for everyone. So grief isn't this neat step-by-step process. And that challenges a lot of these assumptions that we've been taught about what healing is supposed to look like and how the grieving process is supposed to go. So let's talk about some misconceptions. I want to ask you guys all this question. So when you hear the phrase growing around grief, what do you think that means? So one way that I like to think about it is through the analogy of a tree being struck by lightning. So when a tree gets struck by lightning, a lot of it is damaged. The tree is never the same, and the mark stays. The lightning strike stays. So at the same time, though, the tree continues to grow. The tree heals. It adapts. And still, this tree is forever changed. So I think this mirrors a lot of the grieving experience. We often think that grief is something that might get smaller and smaller over time, but in reality, our grief stays with us. What changes is that our life begins to grow around that grief. So instead of getting over it, we're learning how to carry it, and we still keep growing with our grief. This becomes especially important when we think about people in these helping roles too. So for educators specifically, grief shows up in a variety of ways. It might be witnessing students struggle with trauma or systems that are failing them. It can also be a loss of connection to the profession itself, especially when burnout or systemic barriers get in the way of why you may have started this work in the first place. And of course, there's also personal grief that just isn't able to stay at home. It also comes into the classroom too. So a lot of this grief is what we call disenfranchised, so meaning that it's not always recognized or validated. It can also be cumulative grief. So this is building over time without space to process. And this matters because it impacts your emotional well-being, it contributes to burnout, and it shapes how educators show up with their students and in their classrooms. So part of understanding grief is, in these helping professions, is recognizing that helpers also need space, space for reflection, space for support, and space for self-compassion. Um, and part of why this can feel so heavy is because grief is just not something that we typically talk about. So when we talk about grief, we often focus on things like our thoughts, our emotions, but grief is actually a full body experience. It doesn't just live in our minds. It shows up in our muscles, shows up in our breath, our nervous system. You might feel it as maybe heaviness in your chest, constant fatigue, or restlessness that just makes it hard for you to slow down. So this actually happens because our bodies process deep loss as a threat to our own sense of safety. And this just keeps us in a state of high alert. So when we start to recognize that grief lives in our own body, it opens us up to new ways of supporting ourselves. This can come through movement, can come through breath, or just simple awareness. And that's really where this shift, that's the big shift here. So from just surviving our grief to learning how to live with it and process it. So with all of that in mind, we're going to close here with a few takeaways. That grief is natural response to loss, and it impacts the whole person, not just emotionally, but also physically and socially. Grief doesn't follow a clear or linear path. It's messy, it's unpredictable, and of course, deeply personal. And one of the biggest shifts in understanding is that we don't move on from our grief. We grow around it. Life begins to expand while grief remains a part of us. And when it comes to supporting others, especially in roles like education, it's not about having the right words or fixing anything. It's about presence, attunement, and helping people feel seen and not alone. And finally, supporting others starts with taking care of ourselves. That's the real work. Remember that. So as we wrap up here, if you'd like to explore this work more deeply, there are additional resources available. So our Hidden Stressors in Education, Burnout, Trauma, and Grief Workshop series includes 2-part burnout and vicarious trauma videos created by other MSW volunteers, Cassie McComb and Inga Vickers. Those links will be for you down below in the description. The links in the comments will take you to Light's YouTube channel, and they will also they can also take you to Light's website to learn more about Light itself. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for the work that you do, and we'll see you in the next video.